Hi, everybody. Welcome to our podcast. We are your hosts, Eric Fox,
Shane Roberts,
Julia Youssef, Balakuza,
Tomas Alvarez Saavedra.
and today we are here to talk about some of the sports rivalries that you guys know best, how they have been affected by historical events, and how they demonstrate cultural, political, and social change. Before we begin, how is everybody doing?
good. Excited to talk about our topics and share with the audience how each of our individual chosen rivalries were started on the basis of a historical event.
Yeah, I agree. It's crazy to think that every day we come across such big rivalries and we don't even know the history behind how they started. Most of the time, the rivalry isn't about the sport, it's about history, politics, and so much more.
That's why I think it's so important that we are sharing this with our listeners today, because it is really so interesting, especially for fans of the rivalries we're going to talk about today.
Okay, I think it's a good time to start diving into what our audience wants to hear. So I think we should talk a little bit about our overall topic today, just to let our audience know what they are listening to.
Well, I feel like a big question a lot of our listeners might be wondering is, how do we define a rivalry? In an article by Harvard and Dallacus, they explain how a rivalry is when games against an opposing team surpass being just another face-off. They become a symbolic threat to the team's identities. Rivalries can be born out of many factors, such as geographic location, historic incidents like controversial calls, and so much more. And rivalries impact sports a lot more than we might think. Rivalries can lead to increased athletic performance, negative fan behavior, and unethical behavior by players and coaches, and even sports markets. Fans are more likely to go in person to rivalry games and pay large amounts of money for those tickets. Also, sponsorships with rival teams can generate hate and aggression towards brands and sponsors. Overall, rivalries are a huge driver of revenue and fan engagement in the world of sports.
Yeah, to add on to that, I actually found a great article written by Tyler and Cobbs, and it was really interesting. It talks about why some rivalries are more popular than others. They were trying to gain information on sports rivalries from a fan's perspective and just the characteristics that make a rivalry a rivalry. Just to summarize, they gathered qualitative data from 38 fans about 76 rivalries, which was the first study, and then they had a second study based on survey responses from 429 people that measured rivalries in a broader lens. They came up with a definition for how we define rivalries, and that definition paraphrase is a highly salient outgroup that threatens the in-group's identity. Study 1 found 11 recurring elements of a rivalry, but I'll just name a few, like frequency of competition, defining moments, and start factors. And Study 2 confirmed these broader elements.
That is a really interesting article, honestly, and I think it ties great in our overall topic because it talks about what keeps rivalries alive and why we hold on to them even after it was sparked by some historical event many years ago. In the article I read, the authors explained how rivalries become symbolic over time. They stop being just about competition and instead represent identity, tradition, and loyalty, which is exactly why so many of the rivalries we're discussing today still matter decades or even centuries later.
I read an article by Lindsay Piercy and Cody Kaiser about the psychology behind sports rivalries. Every game day against a rival team, the stakes always feel monumental. Experts say that the real reason behind the passion and love for their teams felt by fans is not due to the scoreboard, but rather the human psyche. According to Tarkington Newman, director of Sports Social Work Research Lab, rivalries are more than competition. They're a powerful blend of identity, emotion, and instinct. Another thing mentioned in the article was that sports rivalries are deeply rooted in social identity theory, which suggests that people gain self-esteem from being part of a tightly bound group. A rivalry also creates an us versus them dynamic, which helps strengthen fans' loyalty and builds a sense of community amongst fans of the same team.
I read an article by Ben Littleton that explores why rivalries fuel some of the most intense emotions in sports. He explains that rivalries tap into our deep need for identity and belonging, which is why matchups like Ohio State and Michigan or the Yankees and Red Sox feel bigger than the game itself. The article also points out that rivalries thrive because they create shared memories, both painful and joyful, that bond fan communities across generations. With that, we're going to dive into talking about our individual topics.
So for right now, we're going to start with the Battle of the Sexes tennis match. Maybe you guys have heard of this match, maybe not, but this is arguably the most significant and influential tennis match in history. This match happened on September 20th, 1973, between Billie Jean King, who was a female, and Bobby Riggs, a male, for $100,000.
Wow, that's very unusual for a match to be between a man and a woman.
I know. Normally, men and women don't play one-on-one in sports. The only instance I can think of is mixed doubles, but that's balanced because it's 2 men and 2 women on the court. But this match was honestly unorthodox. It was 1 man playing against 1 woman, and according to an article written by Ethan Wong in 2023, it had 48 million people watching on TV, which is crazy.
Wow, 48 million people? That is crazy.
Yeah, so this match all begins with Bobby Riggs, who is a top-ranked tennis player. According to Wong, Riggs claimed that no woman could beat him at the age of 55. Riggs challenged a female player named Margaret Court and beat her 6-2, 6-1. Seeing this, King decided to take on Riggs' challenge and fight back against this inequality that was placed among women.
So it seems like this match was definitely more than just about tennis.
Yes, definitely. In the years leading up to the match, the U.S. was experiencing a second-wave feminism, which was a movement to expand women's rights throughout America. Wong mentioned that the second wave of feminism was focused on ensuring social equality and gaining equal rights for women, which is different from first wave feminism, where women were fighting for legal and political equality. By the early 70s, there were big milestones for the movement, like the Equal Rights Amendment and Title IX, which, quote, prevented discrimination based on sex in education programs and activities. The match was a pinnacle event in history that embodied everything that was going around on this time.
Can you expand more on second wave feminism?
Yeah, of course. According to Wong, in the 60s and 70s, ideas of second wave feminism began to influence legal environments. For example, Roe v. Wade in 1973 recognized women's rights to abortion. Women were now gaining power and had a direct say on their rights because of the second wave feminism. But even though gaining this power seemed like a good thing, most of the Supreme Court did not like this newfound power for women. So to resist this, the Supreme Court tried to stop second-wave feminism from having any more successes, and pretty predictably, this started arguments over gender rights in any place imaginable. Restaurants, schools, you name it.
Wow, it seems like gender rights really took over American politics.
Yeah, for sure. Before the match happened, there was definitely some tension between King and Riggs. According to Wong, Riggs would make comments that were sexist, and King responded back by having more neutral comments. For example, Riggs would say things like he plans to bomb Billie Jean King in the match and set back the women's lib movement about another 20 years. And King would say things like Riggs is a human too, and every champion has choked before in his life, so he's not unbeatable and not different from anyone else. The commentators even showed divide by saying comments in support of either King or Riggs. It was pretty evident at this point that this gender conflict that started as second-wave feminism creeped its way into pretty much every part of the Battle of the Sexes match.
So this match was a way for everyone to watch a gender debate play out on a tennis court.
Exactly. The Washington Post even published an article before the match that this match between Riggs and King was much larger than the traditional Battle of the Sexes because of how it captures the American culture. Everyone knew that this was an event inspired by second-wave feminism and women's rights activism. King ended up winning the match, playing 3 out of 5 sets, which is what men usually do, even though women usually play 2 out of 3. And this just shows how far she was willing to go to prove her point.
So what did her win do for women's sports?
She actually changed a lot, not just tennis, but sports and rights of women changed. According to Wong, Title IX's influence and strength was increased. The WTA, Women's Tennis Association, and equal pay was created, and even female sports at high school levels were changed, all because of King's victory. A New York Times article from 1973 said King is the one who raised her racket for battle when few women challenged the broad inequalities inherent in the sports structure. And King herself said, "Women can be great athletes, and I think you'll find in the next decade that women athletes will finally get the attention they deserve throughout the years."
Wow, these quotes definitely encompass how the rise of the feminist movement inspired King to be someone who fights against it on behalf of all women to show what they are capable of.
Interesting stuff, Julia. And if tennis showed us the power of sport to challenge social norms, hockey took it even further, turning the 1980 Miracle on Ice into a defining moment of Cold War rivalry. my topic, I'll be talking about how the Cold War played a huge role in one of the most famous sports rivalries ever, the United States versus the Soviet Union in hockey, especially the 1980 Winter Olympics.
Right. So the Miracle on Ice.
Exactly. The game is iconic, but what's really interesting is how political it actually was. I read an article comparing the 1972 and 1980 Olympic hockey tournaments, which showed how the meaning of those games completely changed with the political climate.
You're saying hockey was kind of like a political message?
Pretty much. In 1972, when the U.S. won silver, it was seen as a friendly competition. Kind of hopeful as tensions between the U.S. and USSR had cooled a bit. The games were viewed as a sign that the two superpowers could compete peacefully.
That's pretty surprising considering how tense the Cold War was.
Right? But by 1980, everything had flipped. The Soviets had invaded Afghanistan, the U.S. economy was struggling, and the Americans were losing faith in their government after Watergate and Vietnam. So when that young American hockey team faced the Soviet powerhouse, it wasn't just a game anymore. It was democracy versus communism, freedom versus control.
So America's win must have felt monumental for the country at the time.
Yeah, when the U.S. pulled off that upset, it felt more than just a victory on ice. It was a moral victory for the country. It became a turning point in American identity, almost like the U.S. rediscovered its confidence at the time it really needed it. And that wasn't even the gold medal game.
That's so cool to hear of sports giving people real hope.
Yeah, and what's crazy is that Soviet team was basically professional. They trained year-round under a state-run system, and many of them had been playing together for most of their lives. The U.S. team was made of various college kids from several different schools, so when they won, it felt like the ultimate underdog story. But the politics made it much deeper. It was proof that the American way still worked.
That must have made it really personal for people watching, right?
Definitely. The article mentioned how Americans saw the win as confirmation that democracy and individual freedom could triumph over an authoritarian system. It was never just about sports. It was a reflection of how much of the tension going on in the world.
It's interesting to see how each side represented their values through hockey. The Soviets seemed to treat their players as extensions of the state.
Yeah, exactly. For the Soviets, hockey was propaganda. Every win was proof that communism produced stronger, more disciplined citizens. Meanwhile, the U.S. framed its players as free, independent, and creative, a complete opposition of the Soviets, making each game a miniature Cold War.
So basically, this rivalry was a Cold War battle with sticks and a puck instead of weapons?
Pretty much. The ice rink became a neutral ground for both ideologies to fight it out symbolically. And when the U.S. finally won in 1980, it wasn't necessarily about the final score, rather about reclaiming a sense of pride, freedom, and confidence in one's own nation.
It's wild that one hockey game can have so much of a cultural impact.
Yeah, it really shows how deeply politics and sports can overlap. A thrown-together group of 20-year-olds became this symbol of belief, not just in the sport, but in what America stood for. It's also been cited that this win marked the start of a more confident, assertive attitude in U.S. politics leading into the Reagan era.
So that one game marked a shift in both sports and world history?
Yeah, and that's what makes it one of the greatest rivalries of all time. It's proof that sometimes sports can do what politics can't. Unite a country, even just for a moment.
What an inspiring story. And after looking at how political tension shaped the Miracle on Ice, we shift to rivalry where history, class, and culture collide every season. Boca Juniors versus River Plate. This episode is brought to you by Dick's Sporting Goods, your one-stop shop for everything you need sports-related. Now, switching over from skates on ice to cleats on grass, I will be talking about one of the biggest rivalries in the sport of football, or soccer as Americans call it, Boca Juniors and Club Atlético River Plate, two Argentine football teams based in the middle of the bustling city of Buenos Aires, founded in the early 1900s, nicknamed the Super Clásico, or Super Classic. Every time these two teams meet, it isn't just a game. It's a battle of identity, class, and pride that splits the nation in two.
Wow, that seems very intense. So how did this rivalry start?
Great question. Both clubs were founded in La Boca, the poor area to the south of Buenos Aires. In 1923, River Plate moved to the wealthier district of Núñez, which gave them the nickname of Los Millonarios, or the Millionaires. Boca, on the other hand, stayed right where they were, becoming the club of the working class and the team of the people. And just like that, the rivalry meant much more than just football. Although each team had fans from different socio-economic backgrounds, the passion and love of the game was shown equally by everyone. In fact, over 70% of Argentine football fans support one of these two teams, which amounts to over 20 million people.
So what made this rivalry explode into something global?
Well, a big contributor is the crazy atmosphere. According to a BBC report in 2019, Superclásico games have been ranked the loudest and most emotional soccer games in the entire world. Boca Stadium, nicknamed La Bombonera, literally shakes when fans jump. River Stadium, El Monumental, is just as loud and even bigger. This rivalry became even bigger when in 2018, the Copa Libertadores final, which is a tournament played between all the best teams in South America, had to be played in Madrid.
Wait, why was it played in Madrid?
Well, what happened was that the game was meant to be played at River Stadium, but the team bus carrying all of the Boca players was attacked with rocks, pepper spray, and glass right outside the stadium. This led to the match being postponed. The police got involved, and eventually the CONMEBOL, which is the continental governing body of the football in South America, decided that Argentina was not a safe place to host a final. Moving the biggest match in South American history to Europe was basically proof that rivalry had grown beyond sports. It had become a global security issue.
So what does this rivalry say about Argentina itself?
A lot. For over 100 years, soccer has been the foundation of the Argentine identity. As I previously mentioned, Boca represents the passion of the working class people and the toughness of the South Side. At the same time, River has a sense of wealth and power to the club. A study done in 2020 by the University of Buenos Aires found that people often inherit their team through family. Essentially, you don't choose River or Boca, you're born into it. This rivalry runs so deep that it can shape friendships, love life, and even family relationships. Every match between these two teams is cemented in history, a battle about pride and bragging rights until they meet again.
That sounds more like choosing a political side than a sports team. Are these same emotions still present today?
It has definitely changed, but the intensity is still there. Social media has made the rivalry even bigger, with both Boca and River being two of the top 10 most followed clubs online in the world. Younger fans also keep the rivalry alive by posting videos, memes, and debates every day. Although there is less violence and fewer headlines on the news, every Superclásico still stops the country in its tracks. Businesses close early, streets are empty, and entire families gather around their small televisions to watch the game. What's even more impressive is how the rivalry's legacy continues to grow worldwide. In recent years, international broadcasters like ESPN and Sky Sports have highlighted the Superclásico as one of the top bucket list events for sports fans around the globe. Famous players like Diego Maradona, Carlos Tevez, Gonzalo Higuaín, and Enzo Perez all built parts of their careers in this rivalry. Their stories help spread the Boca River passion internationally.
Wow, it's so interesting to hear these backstories. And while Boca and River show how local identities shape a rivalry, the Army-Navy game reminds us how competition can also be rooted in national tradition and shared service. Alright, now it's my turn, and today I'm going to be talking about a rivalry that is honestly unlike any other in the world, the Army-Navy football game. Most sports rivalries are about competition, bragging rights, and school spirit, but this one is different. This rivalry connects directly to American history, war, politics, and national identity, and it's been doing that since the very first matchup in 1890. What makes it so unique is that the players on the field aren't regular college athletes. They're future military officers who will one day serve together. So even though it's a rivalry built on competition, it's also built on respect, honor, and shared duty.
That already sounds so different from the other rivalries we're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the most interesting things about the Army-Navy game is how it has always been shaped by whatever was happening in the United States at the time. For example, in the early 1900s, the rivalry actually got so heated that the War Department had to suspend the series for several years because tensions between the academies boiled over into real-life conflicts. Even back then, you can see how the relationship between the military branches influenced the rivalry. According to a U.S. Army article that outlines key historical facts about the game, the rivalry has always reflected the larger cultural moment, whether that's military competition, American politics, or national unity.
So it sounds like the military and political climate at the time kind of shaped the game.
Exactly, and probably the best example of that is the 1942 Army-Navy game during World War II. I think this is one of the most fascinating stories connected to this rivalry. According to an article by S.M. Freeman in American Heritage, 1942 was such an intense year for the United States. We were fully in World War II, thousands of American soldiers were fighting overseas, and even at home, the entire country was adjusting to a wartime lifestyle. That year, there was actually a huge debate about whether the Army-Navy game should even be played. People worried that playing football while the country was at war would seem insensitive. Others argued the military academies needed to focus 100% on training officers, not athletics.
So they almost canceled it?
Yeah, it came really close. The academies were leaning towards canceling it for the first time in decades, until President Franklin D. Roosevelt stepped in personally. According to Freeman's article, Roosevelt believed that the game would help maintain morale on the home front and remind Americans of what they were fighting for. He literally intervened and encouraged the military to play the game because he thought the country needed the sense of unity and normalcy it brought. That shows how powerful this rivalry is.
That's honestly crazy. Most rivalries don't get the president involved.
Exactly, and what's even more interesting is how the game itself changed during the war years. For example, the 1942 program, the uniforms, and even the pageantry reflected the wartime spirit. When you look at primary sources from the Naval History and Heritage Command, things like game programs, photos, and official records, you can literally see how the game became a symbol of national resilience. Players wore patches, flyovers honored wartime pilots, and the entire tone of the event felt patriotic. But World War II wasn't the only moment when history shaped the Army-Navy game. Another major example happened in 1963, after President John F. Kennedy was assassinated. The game was scheduled just days after his death, and again, people wondered whether it should still happen. Kennedy had been a huge Navy supporter. He served in the Navy and attended several Army-Navy games. So, the Kennedy family actually requested that the game be played in his honor. Millions watched the game on television not because of football, but because it was a moment of national mourning.
Wow, I never realized the game intersected with so many major events.
Yeah, it really shows how the rivalry isn't about tearing down the other side. It's about honoring each other while still competing at the highest level. And that's what makes this rivalry such a great example for our overall theme. Just like the US-USSR rivalry reflects global politics and the battle of sexes reflects gender equality, the Army-Navy game reflects military culture, patriotism, wartime morale, and the way Americans view service. Over nearly 135 years, every era of American history has shaped this rivalry in some way. So, when we look at how historical events impact sports rivalries, the Army-Navy game is honestly one of the clearest examples. It shows how a rivalry can become a symbol, not just for two teams, but for an entire nation.
Wow, Eric, I never knew all the historical significance behind the Army-Navy game. Lastly, we are going to zoom in to another football rivalry that is unlike any other, Michigan versus Ohio State. All right, now we are diving to a rivalry that might be the biggest in college football, the game, a match between two blue blood programs, the Michigan Wolverines and the Ohio State Buckeyes. The hatred in this rivalry is so deep that the teams refuse to say the other's names, with the Buckeyes often referring to Michigan as the team up north. But the interesting thing about this rivalry is that it started even before these two teams met on the field. This rivalry has roots going back to the Toledo War in the 1830s.
Wait, there was a war between the two teams?
No, not exactly between the two schools, but between Ohio and Michigan. According to an article from the American Battlefield Trust, it actually all starts with the Northwest Ordinance in 1787. The ordinance established a border between Ohio and Michigan, which gave Ohio the city of Toledo. But the maps were actually drawn incorrectly, and had they been correct, Michigan would have received Toledo. There was lots of opposition causing both sides to claim the land, calling it the Toledo Strip.
Wait, but what is the big deal about Toledo? Why did both sides want it?
Well, Toledo is located on the western shore of Lake Erie. Whichever side controlled Toledo would have had huge control of the trade on the Great Lakes, so it was very valuable for both sides. Because of this, tensions started to rise between Ohio and Michigan. The governors of both sides began to raise militias and told them to act against trespassers. This freaked out President Andrew Jackson, so he sent representatives to resurvey the land. At the time, Michigan actually wasn't a state, so they feared that Congress would side with Ohio because they were already established as a state. So the Michigan governor refused the surveys and prepared for war.
Wait, war? Like they actually shot fire at each other?
The Michigan militia did shoot, but they aimed towards the sky in efforts to scare the surveyors. While no one was hurt, Michigan captured 9 of the surveyors in what would be called the Battle of Phillips Corners. But over in Ohio, all they heard was that Michigan had fired on the surveyors, so they prepared for war. Throughout 1835, there would be random fights in the Strip. The only bloodshed was when a Michigan sheriff was stabbed, but he survived. Finally, Jackson wanted peace and told Michigan they could be granted statehood if they gave up the Toledo Strip and instead received the Upper Peninsula. Michigan originally said no because they did not see the Upper Peninsula as valuable, but in 1836 they needed money help, so Michigan gave in, officially becoming a state in 1836.
That's all really interesting, but how did the Toledo War lead to the intense rivalry between the Wolverines and the Buckeyes?
Even after Michigan gave up the Toledo Strip, debates over the Strip continued until 1978. Having to give up such a valuable city made many Michiganders very upset. So when the University of Michigan faced Ohio State in the field for the first time in 1897, it was a way for Michigan to enact some revenge. Michigan ended up winning 34-0, and this game would set the stage for the rivalry that we know today.
So what did the game look like after the Toledo War and into the present?
Yeah, so I went through some newspaper records from both schools to get an insight into how the history has affected this rivalry. In the 1902 game, Michigan defeated Ohio 86-0. The Michigan Alumni Magazine noted how the hatred between these teams was spreading even to the bands, creating an amazing atmosphere. The Lantern, Ohio State's magazine, says that even though most Buckeyes wouldn't admit it, that Michigan team was near perfect. But Michigan's dominance wouldn't always prevail. In 1955, Ohio State beat Michigan in Ann Arbor for the first time since 1937, costing them a trip to the national championship. And in 1995, the Buckeyes would fall to Michigan in Columbus, ruining their title hopes.
So basically, these games between Ohio State and Michigan were setting the stage for who would appear at the national championship that year?
Exactly, and that would be one of the driving factors for why the rivalry is still so strong today. Ohio State's victory over Michigan in 2002 would secure them a place in the championship, with the Michigan Daily saying that season marked the first time Michigan had lost to Ohio State twice in a row since the 1981 and 1982 seasons. Losing this game was a huge deal, with Urban Meyer even saying that you can win a national championship, but if you didn't beat Michigan, then it didn't matter. And that leads us into the rivalry today. In 2021, Michigan beat Ohio State for the first time in 10 years. That win revitalized the rivalry and created a new wave of hatred between these teams. Michigan is now on a 4-game winning streak against Ohio. They beat the odds in 2024, winning 13-0. While Ohio State did win the 2025 national championship, that loss to Michigan was a strike in the heart for many Buckeyes.
Wow, it's crazy how much history is behind such a huge rivalry.
I know, the game is a legacy of hate and historical significance, defining generations of the past and those to come. And with that, we're going to move into some closing remarks.
And that brings us to the end of today's episode. It's clear that sports rivalries are never just about the game.
Yeah, we definitely covered a lot of topics, and each one showed how history, politics, and culture shape the way that fans and players see these matchups.
We hope you see your favorite rivalries in a whole new way now.
Make sure to tune in next week.
Thanks for listening.